have to rhyme every single time I start a new video? I don't really know. But today we're going to talk about cuts, thrusts, and blocks with more sword fighting basics from the Middle Ages. Hello everyone, Lauren here, and yes, we're going to do a bit more of our sword fighting basics today. We're going to talk about cuts, thrusts, blocking, or parrying. We're going to look at how the sword works a little bit beyond our last video. But if you haven't seen the video about footwork and cuts yet, pause this one, go watch the last one, come back to this one, because some of the things that we need in order to perform an effective cut or even thrust, well, that's discussed in the last video. But I don't want to repeat myself too much, because then this will be a 20-minute video. That's a little too long for everyone. So let's dive right in, talk about cuts. So we mentioned that a cut is a push-pull. You start the sword moving, you step, and the sword cuts. Ideally, you cut down to the waist, maybe to the knees. That's what you're imagining in your practice cuts. If you're making contact, you probably aren't going to cut all the way through a person, especially if they're wearing clothing or light armor. If you're fighting someone in heavier armor, all of this is different. We don't use these motions. But for our unarmored fighting and skirmishing, here we go. We have Oberhaus and Unterhaus and a few other cuts with fancy German names. But we're going to start with Oberhau, which means overcut, meaning I'm cutting from above. And Oberhau, there are two of them, one from my strong side. I bring the sword up, and then one from my weak side. It's a little tricky to do this in the spare room. I don't want to hit the light, I don't want to hit the ceiling, I don't want to hit the microphone, which is down there on the floor. So we're doing our best, but we cut one, sword comes up, cut two, 3, 4, those are Unterhaus. So we can have our Oberhaus from above, our Unterhaus, our undercuts, come from below. And 3, remember we're drawing that X at that 30-degree angle. So we have 4 basic cuts in medieval longsword. We can also use those same cuts with an arming sword in the 15th century and side sword in the 16th century. Just showing off to try and get the sound. You would add footwork and a whole bunch of other stuff into that, of course. So we have our basic cuts. Again, Oberhaus, 1. Remember the sword moves and then the feet move. 3, to the side, 4. And then we return to a guard. This is the plow guard. This is our shoulder vom Tag. We'll have more guards in a future video, but for today, all you need to know is knees are bent a little bit, back is relatively straight, you have the sword ready to go, it moves a bit, you cut, moves, cut, positions, cut, positions, cut. Those are our 4 basic cuts. We could do horizontal cuts as well. We can do them also as a Zwerchhaum or Zwerchhaum, depending on how you want to pronounce it. I like the way Zwerchhaus sounds, even though Zwerchhaus is probably proper German. That's our horizontal cuts done. Like that. You're using both the short and the long edge of the sword. So the short edge, my thumb is pointed to make it easy, and of course I am behind and below the sword for defense as I am attacking. And I'm rotating. So the long edge, the short edge. You can do those really quick succession. Really tires out an opponent as you're trying to land that cut. Now, when we talk about these cuts, we're looking at targets in particular. From the temple to the collarbone on either side of the head, particularly if you can get into the neck or the jaw, these are good target areas. And on our 30-degree cuts, we are coming down and we are looking for those zones. When we're doing our Unterhaus, our cuts that come up, we're looking to hit ideally under the arm if we can. You could catch in the rib cage, cut all the way up, but we have arteries under the arm. If you're cutting into here, that arm isn't going to be useful anymore. If you're injured, you're bleeding, take someone out of the fight. So our targets for medieval and early early Renaissance sword fighting, we've got the side of the head from the temple to the collarbone, and then anywhere from the kidney, but particularly up under the arm. We'd also cut someone in the head. We have Scheitelhau. So if someone is attacking low to the legs, usually not a good idea to start by attacking someone's legs, because I just step back and that's a Scheitelhau, and I just cut into someone's head. And remember, all of these have this push-pull motion as well that generates the power. I don't need to wind up and then strike. I don't need to do that. I can launch a strong cut from my shoulder, and I can even cut while moving backwards. So if someone is doing that big wind up and stepping towards me, I can just throw the sword out there, push, pull, cut. And that's just a quick overview of cuts. If we were in an actual class, we'd be doing practice, we'd be doing combinations, and you do that. We number the cuts. Generally, we have 2 Oberhaus, cuts 1 and 2, 2 Unterhaus, cuts 3 and 4, and we can assign other numbers. Horizontals can be 5 and 6. In later European martial arts styles, cutting locations can be different. 5 and 6 horizontal cuts could be to the waist and not the head. But in these medieval systems, in early Renaissance, we're definitely looking at our 30-degree cut up or down. And we can come up with combinations, do sequences. You can even do a cut and then the short edge or false edge. You could cut upwards with that. So you could cut down and then quickly use that short edge of the sword and just kind of do a little cut up. It's fast, maybe not as powerful, but it does give you that little bit of speed advantage. Now all of this is great, but we also have thrusts. And thrusts are very useful, especially for covering a good deal of distance. And remember, you want to make sure that whatever your attack is, you want it in range. You want it to be a threat of the opponent. If I'm attacking way back here and I'm not close to you, that's not threatening. I want to come in and thrust. Now when I'm thrusting, for my own personal preference, if I am stepping forward with my right leg, because I'm right-handed, my palm goes up and I thrust. If I'm stepping with the left, I turn and the palm goes down. It doesn't have to, but it's just more comfortable for me. So you'll notice that a lot of my thrusts, the palm of my right hand is up. Hopefully you can see that in the video. The camera is keeping its focus and doing its job. So thrusts are very important. Thrusts, I might cut. If I missed, I could follow up with a thrust and a little stutter step thrust, and I'm in. So thrust is a very good action for covering that distance in a short period of time and being very threatening. And thrusts under the arms, the face, the throat, the belly. You can even thrust downward, protected by your sword, and between someone's arms and into their torso. A lot of different actions that you can take. But one of the best ways to thrust is when you've already defended against someone who is swinging their sword at you. And the best way to defend or block or even parry an attack, depending on the terminology you want to use, probably just going to call it a block, is to cut. Cuts are for attacks. What are you talking about? Well, the cutting motion is also useful for defense. If someone is attacking me and they're coming in like this, I can defend with that push-pull, and I want that sharp motion, and I want to stop that sword from reaching me. I ideally want the strong of my sword to make contact with the weak of their sword so that I have control. If I just put the sword in the way, it'll probably get knocked back a bit into me, and that keeps the opponent's point close to me, which is a bit of a threat. By making that cutting motion and stepping at the same time, everything mechanically comes together, and I put that power in, snap, and I stop the point. Now the point of the opponent's sword is pointing past me. And I lower the point of my sword and thrust. So that's an excellent way to use the thrust. Block, thrust. You could also do back edge cut. You could turn the sword and do a front edge or a long edge cut. So you can do little movements from the blocking. Fast opponent, as soon as you go to block, they probably already know and they're ready for their next attack. So you have to be ready to then continue, block again, and see if you can find your gap to counter attack. I like the thrust for that because it gives you that distance advantage. So, what did we cover? Very brief video. We covered Oberhau, Unterhau, we have Zwerchhau, we can talk about Krumphaus, Duplierens, and Rutierens, and we have Scheitelhau to the head, right? We have thrusts, which could be the different parts of the body, and of course we're blocking by pushing and pulling, striking with the sword, almost a cutting motion into the opposing blade. We get the cutting motion out front when we are in a neutral bind, or we can have it off to the side slightly to try and get the sword away if we've got our strong on the opponent's weak. So the whole action of practicing cuts is very important in European martial arts in creating sequences. When we do the big butterfly cuts, which I can't do in here, they really get us into that flow, that motion. And that helps us get our edge alignment, gets our angles down, and then we can do sequences and we can assign numbers to the cuts and we can call out the numbers and we can put together these practice sequences. And then we can do that where I'm going to do the cuts and someone else will only do defense. Someone else will just parry against my attacks. So we can build this system together, but practicing our fundamental cutting motions in European martial arts. Even if we're looking at later systems, if we were looking at saber, there's a whole bunch, there's 8 cuts that we could do plus thrusting, and we can call out all sorts of numbers in practice and see which combinations work and which ones are difficult. This helps us train for a fight because we know that if I do this, the most time is to come up from there. So from this cut, you might want to just switch from Oberhau to quick Unterhau on the same side rather than come all the way around. Because remember, timing and distance are very important. You've got to know what your distance is, and then you've got to control that time. You want your time to attack to be short, and your time to defense to be long. All of these moves can also apply to arming swords. Now, if we were looking at 14th century, it's a little different, but it's not a sword and buckler video today. Some of you might be sad, but we can still do those cuts. And just really quick, we can mention Nukin, which is this rising cut up at the head from 133 sword and buckler of the 14th century, but all the cuts apply. So arming sword, you can use a lot of what you've learned. A lot of it is taking this arm out of the way. It can be in front of your chest, it can be behind your back or at your hip. And we create a sequence and we get those cuts in. So that's just our quick video today, an overview of some cuts and the thrust and how we use cuts for blocking because we want to stay defended. The most important rule is don't get hit. That's number one, don't get hit. So learning to use your cutting motion to block, one of the most important things that you can do. When we're teaching a class, we usually bring that up early on because we want to make sure people know how to defend themselves. It's not just all-out attack. If you miss, you need to be able to recover and stop the incoming attack. Anyway, thank you very much for watching the video. Remember, like, subscribe, you can hit the notification bell, share with your friends. If you have questions, please leave them in the comments. Let me know. We can do future videos based on things that you want to see, that you want answered. And I hope that everyone has a really great day.